Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the BearsPod with Parker Hurley. This is your host, Parker Hurley. That means it's Tuesday. It's 6 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Central. And that means we're talking Chicago Bears at this time, like we're going to be doing all summer. We'll be back to Tuesdays and Thursdays when we get closer to training camp. But for now, we're doing it every Tuesday. I do apologize for missing last week, but everybody kind of had that with Memorial Day on Monday. We all kind of had that Tuesday feeling where Tuesday felt like Monday, and it was messing with everybody's schedules. So instead of just adjusting the schedule, and because it is summertime in the NFL, it is such a slow period, as we're just going to be mainly in this episode breaking down the roster position by position. We did the quarterbacks last week with Justin Fields. We're having the running backs this week, and we're just going to keep it going throughout the offseason discussing Chicago Bears. So as always, follow me on Twitter at Parker Hurley. Check everything I do out at beargoggleson.com. Leave some comments as we're talking live. If you don't want to talk running backs, or if you want to add to the running back conversation we're about to have, leave some comments. We'll definitely hit those immediately, and you can dictate where the conversation goes. And if you are listening later on the YouTube channel, leave some comments, because if we see those comments, the first thing we talk about next Tuesday will be whatever you guys discuss. So with that in mind, we're just going to get into it and discuss the Chicago Bears running backs here for a little bit. Like I said, there really is no news. There is actually a brief bit of news that I'll kind of talk about real quickly. Just that Leonard Floyd signed with the Buffalo Bills, and Chicago Bears fans are disappointed because obviously they don't have great edge rusher depth, and really any edge rusher, whether it be Floyd, Ngakoue, Yannick Ngakoue, or any of those guys. A lot of people are saying, the Chicago Bears should sign them, and I've said steadily, mainly Yannick Ngakoue, I've said, is just, I don't see him fitting the Chicago Bears whatsoever. I don't see that fit. I would see Justin Houston far more likely than him at this point. And I really said the same exact thing for Leonard Floyd, and I wasn't surprised whatsoever. The Chicago Bears didn't sign Leonard Floyd. First off, he went to the Buffalo Bills, so you say he's looking for a Super Bowl, potentially, looking for a contender after playing for the Rams and even making the playoffs a little bit with the Chicago Bears. But the one thing you could also say is the Bears had more money than the Bills, or the Bears could have pushed the Bills to pay him a little bit more if they needed to. But the Bears showed no interest, in my opinion, and I have an article on beargoggleson.com that you guys can check out if you want to, discussing why they had no interest in him. And the first reason is, if you look at the Chicago Bears edge rushers, Dominique Robinson weighs like 260. Travis Gibson weighs like 260. And then they just signed this offseason DeMarcus Walker and Rasheem Green, who weigh about 280. That's a clear sign that they're looking for power, weight, anchors from their edge rushers. Leonard Floyd weighs about 240, 245, and Leonard Floyd drops off of the football about 11% and plays in coverage, and that's a really valuable trait in 3-4 defenses and fronts like that. One, it helps their coverages. It creates blitzing lanes for other rushers, and then it also creates stunt lanes for him, as he's able to drop back and loop around, and it changes the perspective in that regard as well. So the Bears just don't do that with Matt Eberflus. In his 4-3 defense, his players all put their hand in the dirt, and they're about, like we always talk about, he drafted the 3 techniques because he wants to push the pocket with the 3 techniques, and he wants speed from the 3 techniques, and he wants power from the edge rushers, because when the quarterback breaks, he wants the tackles to be standing upright and to be pushed backwards by the 280-pound edge rushers, not the 240-pound Leonard Floyd, who, like I said, plays off the ball, uses speed, stunts, twists, and everything like that. It's not a scheme fit whatsoever for the Chicago Bears, so it made no sense. And like I talked about, you can listen to my other show where I talked about Yannick Ngakoue, and I do think the Chicago Bears may sign somebody before training camp, but I knew it wasn't going to be Floyd. So without that said, if you guys have any comments, leave them right now. And if you wanted to finish discussing Leonard Floyd, but right now we're going to get into the Chicago Bears running backs. And I guess we'll start with, the one running back who really was here last season. There are 5 running backs on their current depth chart. There actually are 2 that were here last year, but I guess we could start quickly with Trestan Ebner and kind of disregarding him, in that he's pretty clearly the number 5. There's probably going to be the 4 that make it, and then potentially Ebner makes it to the practice squad if he wants to circle back around. He struggled mightily as a rookie. One of the biggest games that stands out from him was the Atlanta Falcons, where he had a screenplay and he just was so slow to just get out in space and to turn around for the football. And Justin Fields was waiting to throw the football to him, and he just couldn't get into his route. The game was just moving by him so much faster, and Justin Fields ended up eating it and taking a sack. And something we talked about in the last episode is Justin Fields, he takes enough sacks on his own. You can't be having, your 7th-round running back being a reason that he's taking those sacks. So they immediately bench Trestan Ebner. They immediately put Darrington Evans over him. And then they sign Travis Homer, who we will talk about. So Trestan Ebner is the number 5. And then there are the 4 running backs. There's the 3 new additions in Dante Foreman, Roschon Johnson, and Travis Homer, who, like I said, Travis Homer is potentially the Trestan Ebner upgrade. But then Khalil Herbert is the player who's staying. And what's going to be interesting is without David Montgomery in the mix, the Chicago Bears, and when you subtract the fact that Darrington Evans is gone and Trestan Ebner is going to get, no piece of this rushing attack, you're saying that there's 230 carries strictly from last season's offense. And you could make the case, okay, maybe the Chicago Bears aren't going to be the number 1 overall pick. Maybe they're not going to be playing from behind. Maybe they're going to run the football even more. Is there 250 carries out there, maybe even more than that, have to be divvied up between, is Herbert going to get more, or how does it go to these 3 running backs? But I also think you could say that in the Chicago Bears' rare case, they were one of those teams that even when they were so far behind, they were running the ball so much that really maybe there isn't a huge increase in rushing attempts from last season, although there is the obvious potential. And I do think that they're, even despite the fact that they signed DJ Moore, they added Chase Claypool, they're going to, look for steps from Justin Fields. But like I said, if you add the fact that maybe they do throw a little more early in the games, maybe they run a little bit more later in the games, it may even out to maybe they have a similar rushing total to their last season with the Chicago Bears. So who gets these 238 carries? Does Khalil Herbert? Khalil Herbert went from 103 carries as a rookie to 129 in his second season. And to make the strong case for Khalil Herbert should be the guy who gets the majority or a bulk of those 238 carries and takes that step forward, potentially becomes somebody, the fantasy football players, this is your episode, potentially becomes that guy. Could it be Khalil Herbert? You could say he went from 4.2 yards per carry as a rookie to 5.7 in his second season. He was obviously explosive. That's what the yards per carry tells you, is that he was hitting big ones frequently, but then he only did it on 129 carries. If you bump that total up to closer to 200, David Montgomery had 200 carries last season. If he were to lead the way with 200, that's 70 more carries. Does that explosive rate still stay the same? That's a real question. Or are the Chicago Bears sitting there saying, maybe we found the right perfect dose of Khalil Herbert, in that he's maybe not a featured runner, but when he comes in for that change of pace, that splash, and when Justin Fields is already such a dynamic runner on his own, Khalil Herbert becomes, in moderate proportions. Like I said, at 129 carries, he's at 5.7 yards. But then if you bump it to like 150, 160 carries, does he start to, is this the peak and he starts to fall closer to 5 yards a carry? Or, that would be more normal when you think about it, or, that not many running backs could keep that rate up. Not many running backs as it is at 129 carries can have 5.7 yards. But I think because of the offense and the explosive rate, so there is the potential of, if we give him more carries, would that rate start to fall off a little bit? And when you look at Khalil Herbert, one of the more interesting things is that, when you look at him, he's definitely, straight line fast, and he definitely has that ability in the outside zone. He can stretch it, he can stretch it wide, and then he can hit those holes. But when you think about it, he really is, one cut, two cut, sort of runner. He sort of plants his foot and goes, and he doesn't have that dynamic wiggle and shake and things of that nature. So the Chicago Bears, for the most part, they didn't even use him between the tackles because he didn't have that, and because he is just a one-cut guy and he is a straight line guy. And when you have Justin Fields and you're freezing the linebackers and he's able to just hit those holes with explosive nature, it could be successful. But the Chicago Bears still relied on David Montgomery for 200 carries because they still need somebody. I talk about it all the time. Sometimes it's 2nd and 10, and Khalil Herbert is running that outside zone, and he's looking for the big play. And instead of the big play, he ends up losing 3 or 4 yards. Sometimes you need that guy to just run straight up the gut. Or, like I said, it's for Herbert, he's making a lot of big plays down the field, but he's not breaking those tackles or he's not making those defenders miss in space with his wiggle or side to side nature. He's much more straight line. And if you catch him or you hit him, then he's going down. But if, with his speed and the angles, he's very effective. So you look at Khalil Herbert and you say, there's a real chance that he can't take the bulk or that he can't take a majority of those carries. And another article that I wrote was 3 concerning stats or 3 concerning notions from Khalil Herbert for next season. And one of the realities is that, and I think we all knew this, Dante Foreman, somebody that they signed that we can kind of get into and really is, the second case for Khalil Herbert may not get more carries because they signed Dante Foreman, who had 200 carries last season. They just lost David Montgomery. It was like 38 carries between Evans and Trestan Ebner. They just lost David Montgomery, who had about 200 carries. Dante Foreman comes in, had about 200 carries. Does he just slot right in? But then the question is, what do you do with Roschon Johnson? We'll obviously get to that later. But the reality is that on more carries, yes, Dante Foreman had like a 4.5 yards per carry attempt. And honestly, on 200 carries, that's very good compared to Khalil Herbert. And that's where people get stuck in, okay, Khalil Herbert had 5.7 yards per carry, but it was on 129 carries. Dante Foreman had 200 carries at 4.5. If you asked Khalil Herbert to do the things in those 70 extra carries, there's a serious chance that his yards per carry would drop all the way down because he's not going to get those extra yards in between the tackles, and you cannot consistently run those stretch outside zone big hitter plays without it eventually starting to catch up to you. When you can mix and sprinkle in Khalil Herbert, and he's that, it was early on in the season, it was like 2 downs for Montgomery, 1 for Herbert, 2 for Montgomery, 1 for Herbert. When you can do that, and people are used to getting punched in the mouth by, at this point next season, it would be Dante Foreman, who has a better success rate than Khalil Herbert. We all saw that last season. One of the things is, though, that even if he has that better success rate, he's still, with those yards per carry, he was still more successful than him. So you also look at it, and this is what I wrote in the article, is that Dante Foreman actually had a 33% breakaway run rate last season, whereas Khalil Herbert was at 31%. So it is the reality of, when the defense is getting punched in the mouth, taking those power hits from Montgomery or from that downhill gap scheme, more ahead type running. When you go more outside and when you add that speed element of Khalil Herbert, it shocks you a little bit more. It surprises you. It catches you off guard. It takes you a few more snaps to get used to. And that's why his rates are so explosive. But if you gave him the every down work that Dante Foreman got for 70 more carries, and okay, yeah, those 129 carries, potentially he even has that same 5.7 explosive, he rips off a few big ones, but those extra 70 carries, he cannot do down in and down out what Dante Foreman does. It's shown in the success rate. And then you see that Foreman actually has a higher breakaway run rate. It's just that those added carries, that when they aren't breakaway runs, what Dante Foreman is doing is pounding between the tackles with those extra 70 carries. And Khalil Herbert just isn't doing that. So that's where I go back to, is it where, okay, he should have more than 100 carries, 130 carries, maybe he's at his best. And maybe when you start to give him too many carries, he doesn't, he's losing yards on these carries, or he isn't hitting the big play nearly as much, or he's getting worn down to the point where he's banged up now and he's a little bit slower. So in my opinion, I think actually, and the more I've looked into it and the more you watch Khalil Herbert as a player, I think you just realize that I don't think he's going to get many more rushing attempts next season, than he got last season. I think he's still going to be in that 120 range, and I think they like that. And I think that's why they not only signed Dante Foreman, I think that's why they doubled down with Roschon Johnson. And I agree with the idea that Roschon Johnson also is probably just signed because he was the best player on their board, and they traded down from, they had the first pick of the 4th round. So if he was far and away their favorite player and they slept on it and said, we need to take him, they would have taken him with the first pick of the 4th round. They traded down, and still Roschon was the best player on their board. So, I mean, I do think Roschon Johnson is going to be into the mix, but I think that they said that D'Onta Foreman is going to step into that. And like I said, it almost fits exclusively that Foreman had 200 carries last season. Montgomery's leaving 200 carries behind. The Chicago Bears still need somebody to pick up those in between the tackles, in the box type of carries. I think D'Onta Foreman's going to be the person who at least takes the bulk of them, especially consistently early in the season, because like I said, he actually had a better breakaway run rate. He just had a lesser yards per carry rate than Khalil Herbert because he was taking some of the grunt work in some of those, even at the 2-yard line, you can only pick up 2 yards. Khalil Herbert doesn't get those carries, and next season he still won't get those carries. So when you are looking at Khalil Herbert, and like I said in fantasy, I don't think you should expect much more than what he did just this past season. So that's one expectation. And another reality is that Khalil Herbert only caught 9 footballs last season. So if you're a fantasy football player, I think a lot of people are looking at Khalil Herbert and saying, well, he had, a few big games when Montgomery was out last season. Montgomery's gone. Like I said, he's a big play hitter. He's exciting. Every time he touches the ball, it's explosive. Let's buy Khalil Herbert in fantasy. And I'm starting to look at it and saying, well, here's the thing, guys. He's not going to get a lot of touchdowns because they're going to pull him in the goal line. He's not a power back. D'Onta Foreman's a better power back. Roschon Johnson's a better power back. They have Kari Blasingame. They have Justin Fields. He's like their 5th best power back. He's not going to get a lot of touchdowns. He has 9 receptions. So what's in fantasy football, what's a running back who doesn't catch the football or score touchdowns? Probably a bad fantasy football pick if you're, I don't think Khalil Herbert is going to be the best fantasy guy. I think like I said, he's so perfect in this role of 130 carries for 600 yards and, 1 or 2 touchdowns, 8 receptions. It's great for the Chicago Bears because like I said, that change of pace of when Justin Fields has that football, and he can hand it to D'Onta Foreman and it comes at you, or Justin Fields is going one way or the other. Everybody's focused on that. And then all of a sudden, that secondary, Khalil Herbert, when that hits you, it shocks you. But I don't think he'll ever be the primary person. I think he's best as that secondary that, whoa, here comes Herbert. We thought Fields was fast. Here comes a faster guy. And, we thought it was Fields was the speed guy. Foreman was the power guy. Oh, here comes this fast Khalil Herbert. Situation. But even like I said, Foreman has plenty of speed to be a breakaway run hitter as it is. And then the other question with D'Onta Foreman is, 200 carries for Foreman, 200 carries for David Montgomery. Easy. He steps right in, easy replacement. Not so fast, my friend, in that David Montgomery had 40 targets last season. And between Darrington Evans and Trestan Ebner, the Chicago Bears are losing 49 overall targets from last season. Khalil Herbert only caught 9 passes last season. Khalil Herbert was pretty bad in pass protection. Like I said, you can't have running backs who are giving up sacks when Justin Fields takes too many on his own. So Khalil Herbert continues. He's going to stay in that role. He's not going to get an expanded role. There's no room for him to get an expanded role. Well, Foreman also can't just step in 1-for-1 for David Montgomery because not only does he only have 9 receptions, and he doesn't move as well in the passing game, and that's never been a part of his game. He was actually a below-average pass protector last season as well. So this is where another question of, here comes Roschon Johnson, the rookie, and I think that's where D'Onta Foreman had 200 carries last season, but some of that had to do with Christian McCaffrey getting traded, and it wasn't like they drew it up that way. So you start to say that I don't think D'Onta Foreman either is going to step all the way into that. I think what you would say is that Roschon Johnson is, and we've talked about him. You can listen to some of my other podcasts, and I have a film review on him where I talked about how they can ease him into the football game. First off, he's going to make the team due to special teams, but just a quick background of Roschon Johnson was he was a quarterback at Texas right before his freshman season, or I think in the middle of his freshman season. He moves to running back, and he gets 1 season of really talented production, and then Bijan Robinson comes in, and while a lot of people thought he was going to transfer, he ends up being Bijan Robinson's backup, and Bijan Robinson talks about him like he's the best teammate that he's ever had, and he's a locker room guy and all those things, and everybody really likes Roschon Johnson. And a lot of the things that he did that really helped Bijan Robinson are that he stepped in and took some hits in pass protection. He stepped in and took some of the goal line carries that allows Bijan Robinson to not get those power hits. And like I said, Khalil Herbert is in the same regard that he just doesn't take those power hits, those power punches. That's not his game. He's not a very good pass protector. That's not his game. So all of a sudden, here comes Roschon Johnson, who's going to be like, it's like the horse race where, Herbert's out in front, but he's got that inside track. And like, here comes, or he's on the outside is Herbert, but here comes on the inside track, it looks like he's pretty far behind, but here comes Roschon Johnson. And when they make that turn around the midway point of the season, I think you're going to see that the tides are going to shift pretty massively towards Roschon Johnson. And I think it's almost perfect for Roschon Johnson in that the way that you can ease him into it, and that, on week 1, I think you could say that it's probably going to be a 3 or 4 man committee where, yeah, Foreman gets some of those power doses. Herbert does stay in his same role of last season, but then the pass protection element of it goes to Roschon Johnson. And okay, he gets a few pass protection. He's basically the third down back right now, and he's going to have to beat out Travis Homer for that spot. And that's another, just to quickly bring in Travis Homer. Last season, he played over the course of his career, 81% of his snaps were on passing downs. He's not going to get almost any of those carries. He may get 5 carries next season if he even, is active, due to the fact that if Roschon Johnson is a much better pass protector. But I think Homer also plays special teams, and because of that pass protection ability, he's going to make the roster. He's going to be active on game days, and that's why he's well ahead of Trestan Ebner already, in my opinion. So Travis Homer will make the roster, but I think he'll get, a pass protection snap here and there. Roschon will get a pass protection snap here and there, and Roschon will get, maybe 8 carry here and there. For maybe 3 or 4 weeks, I think that goes, and you slowly ease Roschon Johnson in, and then all of a sudden, he gets a goal line carry, and it goes from, okay, now he goes from just a special teams guy who gets a pass protection snap here and there, to the special teams guy who gets a pass protection snap and a carry here and there, to now he's getting a goal line carry, so now we're trusting him in more delicate situations and things like that. And then, like I said, as the horse race goes and as they get to that turn of the midway point of the season, I think that's where you could potentially see the Chicago Bears leaning more heavily to Roschon Johnson, because you can't have it where when Homer's out there, they're passing the football, and when Herbert's out there and when Foreman's out there, they're running the football. Or really, it's, when Foreman and Herbert are out there, it's a run. When Roschon and Homer are out there, it's a pass. You can't have that. But you look at all these running backs and you say, okay, Foreman has been proven, he's a minus in the passing game. Plus, he's a little bit older, and he's only got 1 year left on his contract when you really break it down. And Khalil Herbert, has been proven to be a disaster in pass protection, and he's really not an in-between the tackles type of runner. Homer is the pass protection guy, and he's really, doesn't bring much between the tackles whatsoever. So all of those guys are complete tells when they're on the football field. Who did I leave out is Roschon Johnson, because Roschon Johnson's like 220 plus, and Roschon Johnson took goal line carries for the Texas Longhorns. And as I wrote in my article, my film review of Roschon Johnson, one of the more creative ways the Texas Longhorns got him and Bijan Robinson on the field at the same time was, let's put Roschon Johnson in as the halfback, as the fullback, and let's run the I formation, and let's fake a toss to Bijan, and now we're running fullback dive with a very talented running back in Roschon Johnson, and he's catching everybody off guard because the linebackers are following Bijan, and now here comes Roschon. And why does that work? Because Roschon Johnson is a good blocker, and when he runs up the gut and he fills lanes and he blocks and takes on blockers, and he allows Bijan to take runs to the outside. When they do pitch it, they actually do pitch it to Bijan, and then he has a lead blocker in Roschon Johnson. And that's where, like I said, early in the season, maybe you do that where you mix in, okay, Roschon, starts at, a running back, shifts to fullback, in comes Khalil Herbert. Now you got the speed of Herbert and Roschon Johnson as the power threat on the field at the same time. And that's a snap or two here and there just to mix him in. And then, like I said, by the end of the season, I think you are looking at, okay, Who's the guy that can catch the football? Roschon. Who's the guy that can pass protect? Roschon. Who's the power guy? Roschon. Who has enough burst? I mean, I don't think Khalil Herbert is going anywhere, but I think when you're looking at who's going to be the David Montgomery replacement, I think you're looking at the best bet is Roschon Johnson. And when you head into 2024, I think you're going to see Dante Foreman move on to his next team, and you're going to see that it's going to be the carries would be 200 for Roschon Johnson in 2024, 120 for Khalil Herbert, and then Travis Homer potentially sticks around just as that third down, third and long, catch the ball, has a little bit more speed than Roschon if they need it here and there, and can add special teams value. So, but I think this season, early on into the season, it is going to be Dante Foreman leading the way. And you say, teams obviously are going to catch on quickly, but, in week one, it's not like they're going to be, oh, Foreman's on the field, it's obvious run. I mean, eventually teams will catch on, or, teams do see Foreman and pay him more respect in the running game just naturally. But I think for the first couple weeks of the season, you can get away with a kind of duo of Foreman and Herbert. And you can say that while neither of them bring anything in the passing game, the one thing you can also say is that because Justin Fields has the propensity to run when plays break down, he's not Phillip Rivers. Phillip Rivers needs Austin Eckler, or even when Phillip Rivers had Melvin Gordon, he caught a ton of passes because when the play broke down, Phillip Rivers checked the football down very quickly. When the play breaks down for Justin Fields, he runs. So you don't need as much of a passing threat in the immediate, in those first couple weeks of the season. You would obviously love your running back to be a do everything guy. And that's where, yes, Roschon Johnson lacks some of the explosion that you would really love from a running back, but he certainly has the all-around ability that he can take runs to the outside, he can take runs to the inside, he can pass protect and pass catch, and that's what none of these other running backs have. So I think it's where it's tough to say, and that's where I go back to, if you're a fantasy football guy, the answer to which Bears running back should you draft, none of them, or really the answer is, and a lot of times when there's these 3 or 4 running back committees, it's always comes down to, take the cheapest guy, because one, it's, it costs you the least, it's the least, devastating if it doesn't go well, but also then there is that chance that that least expensive guy has, almost the same exact chance as Khalil Herbert. Does Roschon Johnson have the same percentage chance to end with 120 carries as Khalil Herbert? I think it's pretty close. And then, like I said, in fantasy football, I think a lot of people are going to say, well, Herbert did it last season. Herbert was very good last season. He's going to take the steps forward, whereas Roschon Johnson is a rookie. He's not going to. But like I said, I think at the end of the day, between these 238 carries, what you could honestly see is because early in the season, and that's where maybe in fantasy football, the answer is you draft none of them. And then by week 5, in the signs that you want to see from Roschon Johnson before you pick him up aren't even like, you want to pick him up before the touchdowns come, before the receptions come. So what you actually want to see is the pass protection. When Roschon Johnson's on the field for pass protection, or if Roschon Johnson's on the field in that fullback role, or like I said, once he gets that one red zone touch, and maybe that comes week 3 or 4, that's when you pick up Roschon and you say, it's not going to come week 5, but I want to be there when it comes week 7. I don't want to miss out on him by needing to pick him up week 8. You know what I mean? Like in terms of the fantasy football and things like that. And I do think, yeah, by the time that, okay, you dip his toes in with pass protection, you give him a couple carries by week 4, he's getting red zone carries by week 6, and now he's got, 10 carries for 35 yards and a touchdown by week 7. And then, yeah, because it was, what's that, 3.5 plus 6, 9.5, plus like 2 catches. So he gets, 11 fantasy points. And it's like, oh, but it's, only on 10 carries, but 11 fantasy points because he got that touchdown and a couple of catches. Then all of a sudden, you want to be there before he gets 10 rushing attempts, and it's that creep up, from 4 to 10. Like, you want to be there before, and then from 10, he's going to go to 15. And then, like I said, maybe by week 15, maybe that's when he's, 15, 20 carries. And maybe that's when Foreman's phased out, and obviously injuries and things of that nature will change things. So 238 carries, maybe you do give, 10 to 15 more to somebody like Khalil Herbert. Maybe you give 10 to a guy like Travis Homer. So you got, 210 carries. I think you could. I wrote expectations for Roschon Johnson in his first season. Some guys I compared him to: Jamal Williams, Samaj P. Damian Pierce, Ramondre Stevenson. If you look at all their rookie seasons, it's not like any of them broke out as rookies. Like 120 carries as a rookie for Roschon Johnson. So 120 carries for Roschon Johnson, like 110 for Dante Foreman, and then maybe 130 for Khalil Herbert. So I mean, they're really all in that 100 to 120 type of range, and that's where I go back to pick up the guy who's going to score touchdowns, so that's Foreman, but then who's going to score touchdowns and catch passes is Roschon Johnson, and you may have to wait for it. And because they're all expected to get 110 to 130 rushes, it's going to be gross, but the person who's going to get the least early in the season and the most late in the season is Roschon Johnson, and that's why he's probably the fantasy guy to look into. So we'll be back next Tuesday. More fantasy football for you. We're talking wide receivers. We're going to talk about why I think DJ Moore potentially could be the next A.J. Brown, things of that nature. We're going to talk about, is Chase Claypool back? Tune in next Tuesday, 6 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Central, and then we'll be talking tight ends after that and everything like that. So leave some comments. Follow me at beargoggleson.com and at Parker Hurley. Check out all the articles I wrote about. And like I said, I have 3 stats that concern me for Khalil Herbert. I have a film review on Roschon Johnson, expanding on things we talked about right here today. So check that out, and we'll talk to you guys next Tuesday.